Welcome everybody, welcome back to another evening at Gŵyl Festival. I hope you are all doing well. Tonight with me I have Dr. Helen Vassallo, who is a senior lecturer at University of Exeter. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, not at all, not at all. You ran in particular, Helen runs the Translating Women in Fiction blog, which is a wonderful blog full of lots of recommendations for women in translation. So I was wondering, how did you come to start this blog?
Well, I started the blog because I just begun a new research project on contemporary books by women in translation. And that was born out of my desire to bridge the gap between the things that I was reading for work and the things that I read for pleasure. So to stop looking at the literature of one country or region and instead look at the publishing industry in the context of how books make it into translation. And I suppose in a way that was quite ambitious, but it's grown even beyond that in the years that I've been doing it. So it's very much shaped by and the passion that I have for the subject and growing because of that, and because of the increasingly large network of people that I've connected with. So once the project itself started to take shape, I decided to create a blog so that I could put some of my thoughts out there in the public domain rather than just a purely academic one. So I started off writing about books that I enjoyed, and at that point I wasn't even really sure if it would last more than a couple of months or if anyone would read what I was writing, and I was kind of half expecting to have to quietly close it down after a few months, but actually it's grown and evolved in ways that continue to blow me away. I've been writing there most weeks now for the last 2 years, so posting a mixture of reviews, opinion posts, some interviews, and I just branched out. Anyone who reads it regularly will see that last week I branched out into mixed media with some video reviews, and I definitely didn't foresee that at the beginning. It's something that was prompted by the lockdown and the current circumstances. So that's kind of both where it began and how it's got to where it is now.
That's so interesting. How do you find your books to talk about and recommend? How do you pick them?
Well, it's changed again over the years that I've been doing it. It all started with one book that was given to me as a gift, which I have here. So that was The Vegetarian by Han Kang, translated by Deborah Smith, and this was published by Portobello Books, an imprint of Granta. And reading this book was what tripped a switch in me and made me develop what's now the Translating Women project. I was fascinated not just by the book and its issues of female agency and the female body, but also by Deborah Smith's own trajectory, her decision to learn Korean, her dedication to promoting literature from Asia, amplified, of course, by the publishing house that she set up, Tilted Axis Press, and also her uncompromising approach to the intersectional nature of feminism. So I find her an inspiration not only for her creative talent, but also for her activism. So much of the foundation of Translating Women, I still feel, is indebted to her and to this book. And then after The Vegetarian, I began by looking through recent long lists of the Man Booker International Prize, as it was called then, and its predecessor, the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, to find books by women from around the world. And then that helped me not just start a reading list, but also identify independent publishers who were working to promote women in translation. And so once I started finding out my favourite publishers, I worked through their Women in Translation back catalogues. And now I'm very fortunate that most of the books that I read are sent to me by publishers or distributors. I do still obviously follow prize long and short lists closely, and I do still support my favourite publishers by making sure I buy from them or subscribe to them. And I focus specifically on the small independents because I think they're doing something brilliant and radical. They're pursuing projects they're passionate about. They're taking risks when we know that publishing is a notoriously risk-averse industry. And I just love how they're driven by their own agenda, how so many of them are working to make translated fiction a more equal and diverse space. And, not just good intentions. It's not just about the passion projects, but they're also giving us amazing products. So these books, they're not just well translated, they're well edited, they're carefully put together, you know. So I like, I guess, the integrity of the project. So from the cover design, which is obviously your area, right down to the proofreading, you know, all of that detail that comes together to make a wonderful experience, not just to read it, but to experience these books and the ethos of the publishing houses.
I couldn't agree more. It's really where some of the most exciting energy is in translated fiction, is in the smaller publishers. How does what you do in translating women relate to your day job as an academic? You're a senior lecturer in French. That's that right, isn't it? At the University of Exeter.
Well, I've always taught women's writing, and I've always tried to promote feminism in my teaching. But so often throughout my career, I felt that I have to apologise for that, or I've been on the receiving end of some pretty dismissive attitudes because of it. But I want to do something about the fact that still today students can go through a whole degree without ever reading a book by a woman. And even more than that, without ever realising that that's happened, because it's so normalised for them to equate literature with books written by men. And that's the way it's always presented, even if it's presented tacitly in that way. And so the more we see the same thing around us, the more normal it becomes, you know. So then the less we question it, the more entrenched our attitudes and our approaches become. So I think we have to ensure that women are represented on our curriculum, and not just white middle class women, because, you know, I believe that if our feminism isn't intersectional, then it's not really feminism. So we're seeing right now the danger of white being equated with normal in really painful ways for the world. So, you know, it sounds like a lot to try and change, but if I don't do the little bit that I can, then I don't think I can call myself a feminist. And if I'm not an intersectional feminist, then I don't maybe think I can call myself a good feminist. So there are a lot of things still to fight for. You know, I get really tired when people suggest that feminism is over, that it's achieved all that it needs to. I think that's a really dangerous attitude, really dangerous way to think, because theoretical equality, even legal equality, they're not the same thing as real equality. And that's as true of publishing and of translated literature as it is of academia and politics and any other aspect of our lives. So I strayed away actually from the main point of your question there. Sorry, Caitlin.
No,
thank you. But to go back to the main point of your question, I think we need to break down entrenched attitudes about what an important book is, what that means. If we only consider important to mean part of the canon, then we just carry on teaching the works of dead white men forever. And I'm not saying those aren't good, I'm not saying they're not worth reading, I'm just saying they are not the whole story. So that's one thing. Secondly, I want to challenge the assumption in language education in particular that a translation is somehow inherently inferior to the original, because this is something that's pounded into us when we're studying languages, you know, that it's bad to read the translation. And I think that's certainly not true of modern translations. So rather, I tell my students that reading a good translation can actually help them to better understand a book, because it's the same book rewritten by someone who's probably going to be the closest reader that that book will ever have. So reading a translation can actually, I think, be a way of better understanding a book. So, you know, I also believe that reading literature from around the world helps all of us to have a more open and inclusive attitude. So although I love Francophone literature and I will continue to teach it, I also want to show the importance of reading outside languages that we can master, because if we limit ourselves to reading in only one or two languages, then our worldview, I think, will remain pretty restricted. And so reading around the world is a way of helping us to resist these attitudes and rhetorics of nationalism and isolationism, that are just so prevalent right now and so damaging to our world. So although my academic work and the translating women work are quite separate in many ways, I still have the same overall approach to them. So, the way I encourage my students to learn is the same way that I approach my own lifelong learning, because I think that's what this is. Not just the Translating Women project, but anything we read, anything we do in our life, it's part of our learning experience. And so, yeah, the way that I do that, I want to try and communicate to my students and encourage them to do as well.
Absolutely. I really love the way you talk about how the translator is the closest reader a book will ever have, because that's so, just the interviews that I've done this week, that has come up again and again and again, and that's just a beautiful way of phrasing what I think they've all been trying to say, is that, like, obviously we are rewriting it, but also we're spending a lot of time on every word and thinking about every theme, so there's so much value and work in there. Thank you. So I made you pick only 3 books out of all the many books that have been on women in translating women. So I was wondering, which 3 did you pick, and why did you pick these 3?
Yeah, it was hard to pick 3 in some ways, but I just went with my instincts. And so the first one I've chosen will be absolutely no surprise to anyone who's been following Translating Women for a while, and it is Fish Soup by Margarita Garcia Robayo and translated by Charlotte Coombe for Charco Press. So this is a collection of 2 novellas and 7 short stories from Colombia. They're filled with strong women who want to take control of their lives and their bodies, but they just can't escape their lack of agency. They're apathetic, they're disenfranchised, and they are just so perfectly observed. I read this book nearly 2 years ago. I've now read it 3 times, and I've even read some of it in Spanish as well. And I just will keep reading it through my life. It's just so brilliant. And the translation by Charlotte Coombe is superb. So I'm very excited. In fact, it was wonderful timing. Literally 10 minutes ago, through the door came Holiday Heart. So you've got yours too. Brilliant. So basically, once I finish talking to you, I think the world is going on hold while I dive into this. So I'm very excited. This is a novel, a new novel by Margarita, also translated by Charlotte and published by Charco Press. So that's my third one. My first choice is Fish Soup. I expect if you talk to me next year, I might be putting this one in there as well. But that was my first choice. So my second choice is something that I've read very recently. And I have to apologise if I pronounce any names wrong here, because I think this is one of the pitfalls of what I'm doing at the moment, that I'm working with authors in languages I'm really not familiar with, and so I have to apologise if I do any dreadful pronunciation. But my second choice is this weighty tome. It's by Nino Haratiashvili, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, and it's The Eighth Life, translated by Charlotte Collins and Ruth Martin and published by Scribe Books. I might pop it down, it's quite heavy. But I read this last month, which felt like an act of madness, actually, because I'd suddenly become an overnight homeschooler in addition to working my normal hours and doing my Translating Women work. And, that was the moment that I chose to read a 1,000-page novel. But it actually turned out to be the perfect moment, because I had less reading time, so I was reading less frequently, more slowly than usual. And this epic story accompanied me over a couple of weeks, and I found that just the perfect way to read it. I was living alongside the characters. I would spend the time between my reading opportunities thinking about them, wondering what was going to happen to them next. I don't think you need those circumstances to enjoy this book. I think you could race through it and love it just as much. So it charts the rise and fall of a Georgian family throughout the 20th century. Each generation of that family is trying to make something better for the next, only to find that they fail the others in ways that they can't even imagine or foresee. The characters are unforgettable. They're trapped in a silence that Haratiashvili communicates so eloquently, and the co-translation between Charlotte Collins and Ruth Martin is just a joy. So I really highly recommend The Eighth Life as well. And then
that up. I'm picking that up. I hadn't heard anything about that. That's so exciting.
it was longlisted for the International Booker Prize this year, so I hope that's drawn some more attention to it as well. I imagine that it might be quite daunting, just kind of, we're so used to racing through novellas these days, I think, and that's brilliant and it's really satisfying in lots of ways. But it was really, something else to just dive into this world for a couple of weeks, and I felt I learned a lot as well about things that I had just assumed that I knew because they were big historical events, but they're really given a different perspective. So it's translated from German, but it's written by a Georgian author, and it's about Georgia through the 20th century, and it's, it really is a tremendous book. I highly recommend it. And also my other challenge was I'm completely obsessive about not breaking the spine of my books. So I just, like to say it's still absolutely pristine, and that was quite an achievement, really, given how heavy it is. But anyway, shall I talk to you about my final choice?
Please do. Please.
So the final one I've chosen is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and this is translated by Sophie Hughes. It was published by Fitzcarraldo Editions earlier this year. It's currently on the International Booker Prize shortlist, and I can't say enough good things about it. It is truly amazing. So the book itself, the narrative is set in a village in Mexico where a murder has taken place. And in each chapter, we get the perspective of a different character in this unbroken torrent of narrative rage. The rage against femicide and machismo, but also against a world that creates monsters through its own indifference. So although it's very much located in a particular time and place, the messages in it are universal, and I think it's a real wake-up call to us as well. And Sophie Hughes, she's translated it with such agility, such energy. There were times I was reading it and my jaw just fell open. I think Sophie's a really special translator. She manages to craft these pieces that are intense, they're challenging emotionally and linguistically, and she just creates this piece of work that looks absolutely effortless, or that feels effortless while you're reading it, and I think that's a massive talent. So I read this in January, and I knew right then that it would be one of my books of the year. So you can hold me to that by the end of the year when I do my 2020 roundup. But I kind of felt sorry for all the books that I read next, because this is really hard to live up to. So as I said, I can't say enough good things about it, and I recommend it unreservedly. So those are my three.
That is so exciting, because Hurricane Season is on my to be read pile. It's it's 2 or 3, and so oh my gosh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, bump it up to the top, you won't regret it.
So thank you so much. That was a fantastic interview, and really thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you have a very busy day at the moment. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Caitlin. It was really nice of you, really great to invite me to do this. So thank you very much for having me and inviting me to be part of this project, which is, just sounds so fascinating. I can't wait to catch up with it all.
Oh, thank you. And obviously, Translating Women is linked below. So everyone go follow Translating Women and see all the books. I particularly like how you do your sort of on my shelf that I haven't read yet page. I love that one as well, because it's, I don't know, it speaks, obviously we have lots of things on our shelves that we haven't read, but it's very exciting too.
Do you know that's actually things I have read, the virtual bookshelf? Yeah.
I thought you had, no, there's definitely a page. Is there not a page about things you haven't read yet? Like to be read? Oh, sorrow.
No, I don't think there is. It's a virtual bookshelf, and because obviously, I read usually about 2 books a week, I haven't got time to review all of them, and so I just kind of put this 2-line review up of everything, just to kind of give people a starting point if they want to find further resources. So I don't know if at some point in that I kind of say I'm currently reading, perhaps I do, but I try and update it regularly anyway, which has reminded me I probably need to go and add a few more titles onto that. But thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye everyone.
Bye.